Tom, good to see you. Thanks for coming back on. There's like so much happening, but yet there's nothing
Mhm.
going on.
Yeah.
That's what's the mantra that's going through my head right now. And even when I talk to people on here or personally,
Mhm.
it's like there's a carousel and it's moving fast, but then you take a step back and you're like, well, maybe there's nothing going on.
I think that's a really fair assessment of the situation. And I find that there are the people, and I like to just call it the freedom movement. Okay, people that are constantly out there monitoring what's happening around their country, monitoring their government, people who pre-COVID otherwise would not have been looking at the activities of their government. And I think that crowd has grown exponentially large. And I'm one of them. I'm literally one of those people that now monitors everything that my government's up to because for the rest of my previous 47 years before COVID happened, I wasn't keeping an eye on the government. And I think what's happening now, we're going through this sort of transition. I think what's happening is people, to a certain extent, have lost sight of why they're so actively engaged and why they're protesting, why they're fighting, why they're joining activist organizations, and they're kind of losing sight of why they're doing all of this. And I think people should start doing their own internal surveys right now and say, why am I so caught up in all this stuff? Am I being entertained by what Trump is doing, by what Mark Carney's doing, what two-tier Kier is doing in the UK? Do I have a dog in this fight? Do I need to give this my energy? Do I need to give it my attention? Or can I just kind of gear down now and realize that a lot of these things that I'm focusing on in my life in terms of the government and political affairs is either, it's not in my circle of control or it's not in my circle of influence and it's 100% inside my circle of interest, but I have no control or influence over the things that are interesting me on a day-to-day basis. For example, you guys can't do anything personally about the 34 billion in debt that you are, but you're interested in
I
it.
wish it was 34 billion, 34
Or
trillion.
trillion,
Yeah, yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
I did
No,
mean
no,
to
I
say
know. I
trillion.
know
Yes,
this is funny.
absolutely.
34 billion sounds,
Trillion, yeah.
isn't it crazy though? 34 billion sounds
Yeah.
like a low number.
Yeah, I know, isn't it? Isn't it? And the reality is like our previous prime minister, Justin Trudeau, has spent more money and got us into more debt than all of the previous prime ministers of Canada combined in the history of this country. One guy outspent all of them, right? And so it's a big number. And we are now over a trillion in debt. Where prior to COVID, prior to Justin Trudeau, we weren't anywhere near that. And it's a scary time. It's a very scary time to be a population of now 41 million in Canada and be, I think it's 1.3 million billion trillion trillion dollars in debt, right? That's what we're at for such a small country. I think California has a larger population than all of Canada. I think it's close anyway.
Yeah, and this we were talking offline. When I look at some of the headlines from last year, and even now, fast forward to where we're at, and
Mhm.
I don't as bad as you think things are, and they are. I also sometimes remind myself, I'm like, man, the world keeps moving on, and
Mhm.
I don't know, like, you know, Doug McGregor, Colonel Doug McGregor last year. I remember watching him. He was on Patrick Bet David, I think, talking about there wasn't
Mhm.
going to be an election. And it happened,
Mhm.
the election happened. Civil War. How much Civil War did you hear last year?
Yeah, none.
Didn't happen.
Yeah.
Now, bombing Iran, imminent.
Mhm.
I've been hearing about that for how long?
Weeks.
Well,
Yeah.
but even how many years are they talking about?
Oh yeah. Yeah. But it ramps up every once in a while, right? Until, you know, for example, North Korea. North Korea, a lot of people may or may not know this, but the the nuclear powers, I think it's the group of six, I think it's now the group of seven, including North Korea. They used to pay off North Korea to just shut the hell up. Every couple of years, North Korea would, kick its feet, make noise, make threats, get all the headlines, and the nuclear countries would just go to them and say, "Look, we'll give you some money. Your people are starving. We'll give you some foreign aid, some money. Just shut up about the nukes, okay? Let it go, man. Let it go." And so they'd pay them off to shut up. And then all of a sudden, one day they're saying, "Well, actually, North Korea does have nuclear weapons now." And so they've taken the money, but they broke the deals, which is what you would expect, right? And Iran is very similar in the fact that every couple of years, Iran makes a lot of noise, gets a lot of headlines, nothing really happens, unless they do something really stupid to one of their neighbors, which does happen more often than we'd like it to happen. So yeah.
It's just like even over the weekend they had a call with Iran, and I'm like, God, I wonder if now this is gonna you're not gonna hear about this for a few weeks.
Yeah,
It's
I
it's
mean,
just
let's remember it's good. It's good public support to keep the public always on edge, keep their heart rate to a certain, condition yellow all the time, because you never know what's going to happen in the world and you want the public to support it. You got to just string them along over and over and over until you can't string them along anymore. There's nothing to be strung along, and you either stop talking about them altogether or you actually do take military or economic action against that country. But let's remember it in our lifetime since 2000. Let's look at 2001. Okay, we had 9/11. What did we have before that? Um, not to make your viewers do math, but I just turned 52 years old. Okay, so in my lifetime, the Vietnam War ended. The US government went into Panama, Grenada, Somalia. They shot down, I remember in grade five, they shot down some Libyan aircraft, bombing runs in random places every once in a while. Did I say Somalia? We had Gulf War One, we had Yugoslavia, we had the Arabic Spring, right? And then we went, Gulf War Two, Afghanistan. We had 9/11, obviously, which was a major event. And then we had COVID. And by the way, for a couple of years during the beginning first 3 years of COVID, somehow we solved the common cold and cancer, and we never spoke about terrorism for about 3 years. COVID cured all of those things in our lives. But we had another boogeyman around the corner, right? We're at the end of COVID. Now we've got this war with Ukraine, Russia. We're looking at what's happening in Israel with Iran. There's always a boogeyman around the corner. So it's incumbent on the, industrial military complex to make sure that your public is always at a heightened state of alert. Otherwise, how do you get the support, right?
well, then you look at so I'll be 47 next month, and as you're tracing back and pointing out those events, I look on the economic side. I mean, the recession. I don't remember if it was the name of it in the early '90s. I know that because of what my family experienced. My dad was a small business owner, and we, ultimately lost it during that time. You had I mean, I was too young for the inflation, and Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. I was born in '78, so.
Mhm.
But then you also had the .com bust,
Mhm.
Y2K. Remember how Y2K
Yes,
was going to
I
be
remember.
just.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
remember.
forgot about that one.
I remember. I was working for a credit card company and doing collections. It was MBNA America, and I remember New Year's Eve day we worked. It was a big
Mhm.
property of like 3,000. It could hold 2,000 employees or something. We all had
Mhm.
they had parking garages underneath each building. We had to park underground that day. The only time.
Mhm.
And I remember
Yeah.
looking outside. I was like, "This is so creepy. I just want to get out of here. Like, I don't want to
Mhm.
be here." And you watch the ball drop. I don't remember which country was first. They showed it on the news. It was daytime in Ohio where I was living, and nothing happened.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
nothing came and it
Yeah.
went. And
Yeah.
then you had 9/11. The .com was after that. The Great Financial Crisis in 2008.
Eight. Yeah.
COVID, And but now, when you look at then to where, 2025, you just see though the deterioration of our societies.
Mm,
Like,
yes.
you just see it's just the decay. I mean, I live in Arizona. I mean, I drive around and I just see it.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's like that in Canada where you're at, but
Yeah, well, for Canada, it's more mental right now, the decay. What's the funny saying I've used and heard? I never came up with it, but the beatings will continue until morale improves. And mentally in this country, Canada's in a very, very dark place right now, mentally. We have so much division. We have divisions between Canadians and Americans. We have divisions between Canadians and Canadians. We have the young Canadians that are really angry at the boomer Canadians. And, we still have people that are angry about the vaccines and the mandates and the decimation of our economy, people's lives destroyed, people's careers destroyed. And in this country, unlike in the United States, there's been no political changes so significant where the public feels like there's going to be some accountability for what was done to us. And, 3 years later, I'm still facing a $290 million lawsuit for my participation in the Freedom Convoy 3 years ago. Chris Barber, Tamara Leach, Harold Jonker, Pat King, Jason Vanderweer, and a bunch of other people who were all charged at the end of the convoy for mischief. Some of those names I just said have concluded their trials and they were all found guilty of mischief. Some of them are about to start. For example, Harold Jonker is about to start, from mischief. And to go back to Chris and Tamara's trial, Chris and Tamara were charged uh, each with 6 counts, like mischief, counseling mischief, intimidation, stuff like that. Really, really low level, very low level charges. Chris Barber had one additional charge, which was disobeying a court order. Both of them were found guilty of mischief, and Chris got the additional guilty verdict on disobeying the court order. But let's put this into a greater perspective. You have a trial proceedings that went concluded 3 years after the Freedom Convoy was over. When the trial for Chris and Tamara finally started, which was 19 months ago, they just got their verdict. They still have to go back now to Ottawa in another 2 weeks for sentencing. Okay, this was a multi-million dollar prosecution from the Crown Attorney. For your American listeners, it's the same as a district attorney. The Crown Attorney here spent millions prosecuting two people for creating or leading the Freedom Convoy. And here's the thing that really upsets me about this. For 2 years, there was worldwide rally. I think there were 6 of them in Toronto. There was protests in Edmonton and Calgary, all these cities. Toronto had protests. America had protests. There was protesting COVID mandates all over the world. But here, specifically in Canada, where I live, not one politician took any action to even listen to the protest or people who were upset about COVID-19 mandates. In fact, the contrary, they actually bragged about it. The idiot who runs the province that I'm in, Doug Ford, and we can get back to Doug Ford because he's been pretty horrific. He's made a lot of disgusting statements about America because of Donald Trump's tariffs. But that's a side note. But the reality is, for 2 years, people were upset and protested and knew that their fundamental rights were being grotesquely violated by the government. And yet, none of them changed course. None of them listened to the people. And you know what censorship was like back in those days. So, when I sat 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, actually, in the courtroom and I listened to the verdict of Chris and Tamara, there was no discussion whatsoever at all about what were the factors, what was the context that led to the Freedom Convoy even being manifested in this country 2 years after all these unsuccessful protests. So what we have now is the lowest level of charges for two people that organized the biggest protest in Canadian history. They're being persecuted politically and in the courts, and the standard of their conduct is deemed to be so exceptionally high that they're now facing jail time. But the people who perpetrated all of these violations of our human rights, our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in this country, they just walk off into the sunset, perfectly absolved of all accountability. You know, we're not looking at them. Not one of these politicians have been put in front of the courts yet. And I want to add this one piece. We've even had a, a judge in this country rule that Justin Trudeau violated all of our rights when he invoked the Emergencies Act 3 years ago. Okay, so Justin Trudeau has been, we don't have the same sort of censure or anything like the American system, but we have an ethics commission here, and they have twice found Justin Trudeau guilty of violating ethics. He's been embroiled in so many scandals. I can't even remember how many and which ones they all are, but it's upwards of 10 different scandals. And yet there's been no accountability, especially after the fact when a judge came out and said, yeah, you didn't have the right to invoke the Emergencies Act and you violated these people's rights. That didn't even factor into Chris and Tamara's criminal trial that they just went through. And so we have a system, like I said, where the standard for the people is catastrophically high, but for the politicians, it's catastrophically low. And so when we look at Canada right now, there's not a lot of hope in this country. There's not a belief that there will be a reckoning or accountability. You know, we're looking at it saying our taxes are going to go up and we're going to give these people raises, and they're not going to be fired. They're not going to be criminally prosecuted. The reason they won't is because the politicians own the the attorney general. The attorney general and the government own the RCMP. So there's going to be no federal prosecutions. And so, the morale in this country is really, really low. And right now, we have a prime minister of Canada who nobody elected. It's because we have this really stupid parliamentary system, unlike you guys having the Republic. We literally have a guy who was installed as the current prime minister. Luckily, he just did call for an election. The election will be, I think, April 29th or something. Um, so you look at this and you look at the state of morale in this country and the level of government, just corruption, absolute corruption in this country. And there's one more piece I didn't mention. The Liberal government of Canada owns the legacy media. Our media here, it's not like Fox or CNN there where it's funded by the viewers. Our media in Canada is funded by the Liberal government to the tune of about $1.5 billion a year. We have CTV, Global, uh, uh, CBC, and some of these other smaller medias. They're all funded by the taxpayer. So they're not going to go against what the government says because we fund them through taxes. Sorry, my dog is just making a lot of noise in the background.
I don't even hear it. What
Oh,
happened
that's good.
to Candace Bergen? She's still because
She
she was on the forefront, defending you guys during all
Yeah,
that, and I don't hear her name anymore.
she retired. And I would say that it was a very loose um, defense of us. Um, sorry. Sorry. So Candace Bergen, you know, I liked her. I did have a lot of admiration for her. I like what she was doing during her time during the convoy, where she took over, like the Conservative Party of Canada ousted their leader. She took over as the interim, and she only stuck around for less than a year because the party itself decided, okay, we're going to have a legitimate leadership race, pick a new leader, and then can you just excuse me just for 1 minute?
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by McIlvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcilvaney.com/coffeeandamike. Yeah, it's Tom had to run out for a second, so I'm gonna chat solo here while waiting for him. But it's hearing all this in regards to Canada. Oh, see, you guys don't even get to hear me anymore. I've already stopped my solo chat. Tom, you got me. I was
Yeah,
attempting to do a solo talk for a second while you stepped outside.
yeah. Sorry,
No, it's
my
okay.
dog was just going crazy.
No, it's okay.
So
I didn't even hear it, but yeah. So because she seemed, I mean, she looked relatively young. I mean, like to retire.
yeah, I think so too. But one of the rules within that party is if you become the interim leader, you become disqualified for running as the leader of the party. So it seemed to me like she had a sort of a long-term plan to retire from politics altogether. So I think she accepted the job as the interim. I mean, I liked her. I thought she's a very brilliant woman. She's a lawyer, incredibly articulate, very skilled. However, the one real dissatisfier for us is, she did a photo op with a couple of truckers when she took over as the leader, and then the next day went into the House of Commons and basically gave a public statement and said, "Okay, truckers, you've proved your point. Now go home." And so we were quite incensed by this, and I did speak to another member of Parliament about it, and I said, it was pretty insulting, very upsetting. And he said, "Yeah, you're not the only one. There was a lot of people within the party that were pretty upset about it, that she did that. But she stepped down. Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the party now. We're in a full-on general election. It was a snap election called by Carney, and the election's at the end of the month. So we'll see what the results are. The polling around here, you cannot trust the polling because it's again, the polling is being published in the legacy media in Canada, and who funds it? The Liberal Party of Canada. They've got a vested interest in making sure that the Liberal government actually does succeed and wins the election. Why? Because Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, has publicly said, if I'm elected, I'm going to defund the CBC and all this legacy media. The taxpayers shouldn't be paying for you. You should be competing on the open market. If you're truthful, if you're reporting very well, if you actually behave like journalists, then the public's going to reward you with their viewership. But if you continue down this path, why should the taxpayer have to pay to be lied to? So they're not fairly covering the Conservatives or the PPC or any of the other parties. And I don't care about the other parties. I care about covering, in a larger extent, yes, I believe in covering all the parties fairly because we're supposed to be a democratic country. And I think it's disingenuous, disrespectful to the public if the media in this country doesn't give fair coverage to all of the parties. So I think all parties deserve the fair coverage because the public deserves to hear about these things. But you can see a real slant in constant attacks on the conservatives. It would be like CNN giving fair coverage to Donald Trump, you know, except that in Canada, there's no equivalent to Fox. There's no media here in Canada that's, on the right side of this political spectrum. It's all left-leaning media. And then you have independent media or podcasters or writers or Substack people, right? That's all you get. And you don't get the same viewership for, the conservatives that you would expect. And nor do you get any real honest to God coverage of the PPC here in Canada.
You know what though, Tom, is I think in America, and we're experiencing right now, you're seeing the propaganda on the right media.
Hmm.
Trump can do no wrong. I was
Yes.
just talking about this last week. I said there's Trump derangement syndrome and there's also Trump
Hmm.
obsession syndrome.
I agree.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's so bizarre because also I think part of it, people are more interested in going to Mar-a-Lago and staying at Mar-a-Lago than they are about being
Hmm.
objective with the reporting. I mean, I see some of the questions that they're asking him right now, and it's just like, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to defend any of the left media, but I mean, at least they're being a little more objective than the right. I mean, some of the right, it's just all unicorns and butterflies with everything.
Yeah. And I think that's a very true and fair statement to make. There are people that are brainwashed hard on the right and brainwashed on the left. And somewhere I want to say we're always competing for the 90% in the middle. And I hope that the numbers aren't that high out on the fringes of both sides of the spectrum. But it is true. I mean, there are things that, President Trump has done that I disagree with and I don't like. But I also don't fully understand it because, he doesn't call me and give me a briefing on what he's up to for the day. So I don't know. And the same thing for, our party, the current government in Canada. I don't know what the left is thinking. I don't know what Mark Carney's up to. I have to guess. Um, and I have to look at past behavior to try to figure out what the future is going to be, only so much that it impacts my life. I'm not trying to I don't have a crystal ball and I try to avoid pretending like I do have one because there's no point anymore. Um, you just have to look at the sort of three circles, which is your circle of control, that's me, circle of influence, that's me, circle of concern, there's nothing I can do about it. Nothing. And what we find is too many people are always operating in that circle of interest and less in circle of control, less of circle of influence. And that's a problem. And so, I agree fully with that is the right sometimes they're just very blinded by having this political messiah that's going to come in and change everything and put their life back to what they thought America used to be or what Canada used to be. There are no political messiahs, and I have a hat. It says Maple Mega. And I've had a few strange looks, but I wear it with pride. And the reason I wear it with pride is because mega is not Donald Trump. Mega is an ideal. And anybody who says that, oh my God, you're a right-wing this or you're that or whatever, it's like, no, you don't understand. Mega is an ideal that everybody should aspire to. Make Argentina great again. Make, Canada great again. You should always aspire to do that. It's more of an ideal. You want the leaders to do what puts your country forward first and foremost all the time, right? So I don't look at it like I'm wearing Donald Trump fan club hat. I'm saying we should all be aspiring to have the best countries in the world. And so when we vilify the mega crowd, what we're doing is we're saying we don't like Donald Trump, so I hate you because you're wearing a hat, right? And I like to be more precise than that.
When you look at the trucker convoy and you assess at that time, was it successful? And before you answer that, what if, in hindsight's always 2020. What would you have done differently?
So I do think it was successful in many different areas, but overall, let me look at the big picture and try to come down and focus where I think a few key areas were successful. Our government here in Canada viciously attacked peaceful protesters and arrested them. They viciously beat wounded veterans from Afghanistan and, you know, put them all in plastic cuffs, lined them up, didn't give them access to legal counsel, uh, forced them to sign an undertaking in some cases, or go to jail. The deal was you leave the city right now, or we put you in remand. You go into a cell without legal counsel. because, they're lined up outside with their hands cuffed behind their back, waiting to be processed. And ultimately, our government didn't decide to lift the mandates until months later when they were good and ready to do so. Had the government of Canada sent an envoy on the first week to meet with us and start to negotiate in good faith with all of us, like he had done with so many other protests in this country, the outcome would have been a lot different. But at a time when other countries were repealing their vaccine mandates, he imposed the mandates on the truckers. And then it would be several months before he lifted those mandates again. And then premiers and other government levels started to repeal their own mandates. So, did the trucker convoy ultimately achieve the objective that we went to Ottawa for? No, it did not. It didn't. However, I can't tell you the number of people that told me that they had fully lost hope and were suicidal and didn't know if they were going to make it another couple of months until the trucker convoy rolled into Ottawa and gave them hope and gave them pride in their own countrymen again. So that's a win. Do I believe that we'd all still be wearing masks right now today and probably mandated on our 10th booster if the trucker convoy didn't go? Yeah, I think that's certainly true. Would the public be completely on the verge of full-on digital ID, digital currency? Yes, I think so. I think a lot of countries around the world took their inspiration from what Canada did at the convoy, and there were convoys all around the world. If you look at what the Dutch were doing with the farmers, you looked at you guys had the People's Convoy that went to DC as well. There was a lot of inspiration. From my count, I saw 27 countries try to replicate a Canadian convoy in their own cities to varying or lesser degree of success. But at the end of the day, did it wake up a lot of people in this country to start asking questions? So yes, it did. And I think that's a success. That's a victory. To do it all over again, there are many things that I would do, but I will say this, and I wrote about this extensively in my book about the convoy. The one thing that I would absolutely do again, and it wasn't my role when I first, participated in the convoy. It's not what I went there to do. It's not what I was expecting to be involved with. But I think before the convoy even arrived in the city of Ottawa, there should have been a clear written list of expectations, why the convoy was going there, what we were seeking in terms of, the people we wanted to speak to, the people we wanted to meet with, and ultimately, in no uncertain terms, what we expected to see to make us all go home. And I'm not saying it's a manifesto, because if you say manifesto, everyone's going to think it's some weird crackpot Ted Kaczynski kind of thing. It's basically in writing, and it's not to give it to the people that are supporting you. It's to give to the media. It's to give to the government. And it's all, I suppose, in a sense, it's to give to the people that are supporting it too, because it avoids this mission creep. I remember being at a meeting where we thought maybe we were going to get a meeting with the government, and then somebody in the meeting said, you know what, we should also add on, we want to get rid of the carbon tax here. Because here we were getting taxed forever on carbon emissions for our vehicles. Okay. And really, I was like, no, that's not why we're here. Like, we're not going to get involved in all this mission creep and start tacking on all these goodies, these pet projects, right? You have to have a very clear mission statement, who you want to talk to, what's going to make us go away, and when. This is the clear expectation of what we want to achieve with this thing. I think that should have been given to the government at all levels, and to the media and to the police at all levels, long before the convoy reached Ottawa. I think that would have made a big, big impact, because that wasn't done up front. It wasn't done until the beginning of the third week, when we did that and we put that out to the public. Because by doing that, you kind of leave the media, the legacy media, who hate you anyway. You give them sort of this blank slate as to what they want to write about you. Because we shut them out of the media. we like any press conferences, we kind of shut out the legacy media because their behavior was so disgusting and the lies were so blatant and grotesque. So we shut them out. And I think we should have given them the press release on day one and said, this is what we are, this is what we're about, this is what we hope to achieve. And there, I've done the work for you. Just publish that in your newspaper. Make a story that this is what we're asking for. And if, by the way, you change the story, you change the media release, we're going to publish it on all of our social media anyway. So try to be accurate because I've written the bloody press release for you. So there was those little, like the communication plan, I think, between us and the government, the police, and the media was sorely lacking when we got there. Mind you, we were doing TikTok videos, YouTube lives, we were doing all these things, but we didn't show up in advance with something. And that wasn't really my role. That was the responsibility of one other individual. And unfortunately, that guy was completely out of his depth and honestly had no idea what he was doing, unfortunately for us.
Well, and this is, when I look back at that and, fast forwarding to where we're at now, see, to me, the CBDC is basically here. And when you're
Mhm.
going up against technology, because, and correct me here if I'm saying this wrong, but, when the convoy, when everybody did decide to go home, then the government can just come in. They don't need to send guns to your door type of scenario. They just debank
No.
you,
Mhm.
turn your credit cards off, take away your ability to, buy anything, make a living, what have
Mhm.
you, and then they can run you through the court system and financially break you, like they've
Yes.
done here in the United States. Some people I've had on my show. I mean, I reference VDare a lot. I don't know if you know Peter and Lydia Brimble. They were the first, one of the
Mhm.
first early in America to experience a lawfare from the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. Only
Yeah.
when President Trump started experiencing it that their story got the exposure that it
Mhm.
needed. But
Mhm.
I don't know where we go from here. And I'm speaking for both of our countries because we're in the same boat in a sense of, technology as it continues to advance and advance and advance, you can't you can't stop it, right? I mean, they could just continue to just tighten the grip.
Yeah. And, this is really a scary thing because, like I said, mentally, where's my country right now? Half the country thought that it was great that the Freedom Convoy got the crap beat out of them and arrested and their bank accounts frozen. And not a lot of them sat there and went, wait a minute, can this happen to me now? Can I post something on my Facebook in support of something that the Liberal government of Canada doesn't like? And now all of a sudden I've got the cops showing at my door, like what they're doing in the UK. We've already laid the foundation for all of this here in Canada. There's a bill that was in place before this election and before Justin Trudeau decided to prorogue our government, which is basically he shut his government down for 4 months. There was no legislation. They weren't going to work, nothing. Mind you, they were still getting paid and they got a raise on the 1st of April. Um, but all legislation, when he prorogued government and announced that he was going to be stepping down as the leader of the Liberal Party, and then he would resume the government after they had selected a new leader, which is Mark Carney, then they, reactivated our government. All that legislation went on to pause, but they were working on, I believe it's Bill C-63, which is the Online Harms Act, which includes things like ankle bracelets in your home, um, you know, social media training, fines, actual jail time, and if it's a hate crime, if it's deemed a hate crime, you could spend life in prison in Canada for posting something related to a hate crime in Canada. So they were working on that just before Justin Trudeau announced that he was stepping down. Now, if you look in the UK, they have a journalist and I think a mother that they just sentenced to. I think the journalist got 6 months in jail, and I think the mother just got 2 years for social media posts, right? And so Canada was already laying that foundation, but it got interrupted because of the Justin Trudeau and now Mark Carney. But Carney said if he gets reelected, he's going to bring back. He'll continue to work on Bill C-63. this online harms act, which is just another great censorship bill. They've already laid the foundation, they've tested it, and they've executed the fact that, like mine, you can have your bank account frozen, and the banks will be happy to comply. Even though, one of our banks, like, there's only five major chartered banks in Canada, and then you have credit unions. It's unlike the US where there's thousands of independent banks. Um, our bankers during the time of the convoy, the CEO of one of the major five banks was sending notes to the government saying, no, shut their bank accounts now, like freeze their accounts now. And you got a TD Bank that was just found guilty of money laundering for cartels. We have five big banks, multi-billion dollar banks here, and one of them just got nailed for laundering money for a cartel. I haven't heard of any CEOs getting arrested or charged or convicted, but yet we're supposed to put our money in these banks. One, they were ready and willing to freeze our accounts when the government flicked the switch, which they did so. And then they get caught money laundering. And it's like, who do we trust here? Why should I trust you, the banks? Right? Um, the insurance company here got the same order from the government to freeze people's insurance accounts on their house and then their car. The insurance company said, like hell, we're not doing that. So the insurance industry actually uh, refused to comply with the government of Canada's orders. But the bankers, wow, they jumped right in on it. They had no problems with it.
Isn't it crazy? The bankers will jump right in, but then, like I was, talking about the cartels.
Hmm.
You don't need to drop drones on the cartels; just freeze their money. And
Yes.
people are like, well, it's complicated because there's layers and there's shell companies.
Mm.
I'm like, well, they got no problem going after people
Yeah.
against the narrative. They'll shut it right down. That could get done
Yeah.
instantly. J6,
Yeah.
they found all those people.
Oh
Just
yeah. Like, another great example. We have, months ago, CSIS, which is the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. It's our spy agency. And they've been warning the public and the government for years that there are politicians at every level in this government, in this country, that are either willingly or unwillingly being influenced by foreign governments and foreign agents. And specifically, they came out and said there's 11 federal members of parliament. So this has been a scandal for months, and it's been big news. So the government, decided, okay, I'm the government. I'm going to investigate myself. And surprise, surprise, again for the third time, the government found that they did nothing wrong, right? And so we're now in election, and our CSIS, our spy agency, has come out and said there's 11 known members of parliament who are collaborating or under the influence of foreign governments, but they won't tell us. We had a judge did a commission, found, yeah, there's no wrongdoing here. I doubt it. CSIS wouldn't come forward publicly and say there are if that wasn't true. And yet we're in an election. So the public right now potentially is going to vote for 11 federal members of parliament who are traitors to Canada. You don't see the CBC talking about it. You don't see Mark Carney or any of them saying, yeah, I've looked at the list and therefore I'm disqualifying these 11 people. No, the voters are expected to just go to the polls and take a chance and hope that they're not going to vote in one of these traitors.
do you have
This is
faith?
Canada.
Okay.
But this is Canada that we live in. But the public is held to a very, very high standard of conduct, right? You don't dare question the government and have the greatest protest in Canadian history because you're facing 10 years in jail if you do that. But hey, we can have 11 traitors in our parliament, and that's okay. We're just going to keep paying them.
How much faith do you have in the election systems in your country?
About as much as you guys do in yours. We all use Dominion voting machines. And we hear the same stories, the same horror stories with the Dominion voting system here in Canada as you guys had in the US or have. We should go back to paper ballots. Um, Another thing I don't like here is the nomination processes here for all the parties. It's not very good. where you have a local constituency that wants to nominate their federal candidate, but the party reaches down and says, no, 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 we don't care that all of you guys that live there want Tom. We're taking Michael. Michael's our guy. Put him in as your candidate. That's happening across all of the parties here. There's Canada is a country that's completely void of a truly democratic system of government. It's terrible here. It's just terrible. I wish that we would switch to a republic. It's never going to happen, but it would be nice if it did.
Yeah, uh, I mean, I was wrong in the way that, in the direction I thought the election was going to go last year because of those, reasons that you brought up, and the fact that
Mhm.
all these states in 2020 using COVID as a guise were able to change the voting. And
Yeah.
but I also think that big tech got behind President Trump this go around, and I think they prevented
Hmm.
they prevented the shenanigans.
Hmm.
So it was a
Yeah.
fair election in terms of this is what the people wanted, but
Hmm.
I also think there was I don't think the people I don't think the individual's vote matters anymore. I voted and I voted for
Hmm.
President Trump, but I just I don't believe it.
Yeah. See, here in Canada, you're never going to you're never going to see Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre, Maxime Bernier. You'll never see their name on a ballot unless you live in the riding where they're trying to become a member of parliament, because we have this horrible parliamentary system. If you belong to the party and you go to the conventions and you become part of the delegations, then you can vote in that capacity on who gets to be the leader of the party, right? And the leader of the party who has the most amount of seats in the House of Commons becomes the prime minister. But when Justin Trudeau, he's in the riding of Papineau, 3 times he got elected. There's no ballot that I'm ever presented with as a Canadian citizen with Trudeau's name on it. I don't get to vote for the prime minister. That's not how our system works. It's really stupid because you know we have this British parliamentary system, and it's terrible. In fact, in Canada, one of the issues that it really upsets a lot of Western Canada is the fact that by the time the Maritimes, Quebec, and Ontario are finished at the polls, the election's over. So where I live well, I'm in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, and 33% of the entire country's population lives in Southern Ontario. They live in Quebec, Southern Ontario, and then if you look at that 49th parallel, the border between, Alberta and Montana, like that line, the vast majority of Canada lives along that parallel line. There's very few people above that, just because of the climate. Like it's just too harsh, right? And because the population density is so extreme in Quebec and Ontario, and even Ontario only has 15 million people in Ontario, but the election is already decided by the time the votes are cast in Ontario. It's over. So Western Canada gets very little say or impact on which party becomes the party in power in Canada because we have all the population here. The votes are cast. And the way we do it is the number of members of parliament you get is based on your population. So the most amount of members of parliament we have are in Southern Ontario. So basically, if you win Ontario, you win the election. If you want a majority, you get Quebec and Ontario, and everything else is just gravy after that.
What are your thoughts on that when they throw out the Canada becoming the 51st state?
Yeah, I think it's a terrible idea. I think it's a terrible idea for Canada, for Alberta. Let's just say for Alberta, okay? And I'll say this because really the argument is mostly around. Okay, there's a couple of pieces to this, right? Um, Canada's too big to become a state, first and foremost. It would just be too much to try to manage. And There's a lot of pros and cons to it, and I tend to look at the whole thing more in an objective criteria. Like this is just economics, really. When you talk about rational decision making, that whole theory in economics, you look at it objectively. And then there's the other group that looks at it emotionally and says, no, I love Canada. We're great. We should be independent. Look at our history. It's all emotional. If you look at it from an objective perspective, there's a lot of pros and cons to doing this. But ultimately, this is the way I think it's going to unfold. I think within the next year to 2 years, Alberta, well, in fact, it depends on how this election goes at the end of the month. If the Liberals get in, I see within 6 months, Alberta is probably going to hold a referendum as to whether they stay as a part of Canada or declare their independence. Their independence would be great for them. It would be very harmful to the rest of us. But ultimately, Alberta would save an enormous amount of money by going it alone because that's really the oil hub of Canada. They've got all the resources that Ontario has, plus the oil. They also have a big dairy industry in Alberta as well. So, as long as they still have customers in Alberta and they declare independence, they're going to be able to maintain their standard of living. They'll be able to have a trading deal with many US companies, with the United States. Then Ontario and Quebec will be forced to set up trading deals with Alberta to get those resources that we normally get. So I think ultimately, I don't think Alberta should join the United States because if Alberta joins the United States, they become number 51 in line for everything. Yeah, sure, there'll be a honeymoon period taking Alberta into the US for a while, but it's going to be a rush for US companies, US conglomerates to get into Alberta and take control of all those natural resources. And I think that's what the big risk is to Alberta right now. Um, Alberta would be able to defend itself with if they maintain their steady customers from the US and other provinces. I think because there are several military bases in Alberta. So I don't think national defense will be a really big problem with Alberta. And I think they'll be able to create and maintain the same military alliances Canada has with the US, but now it'll be between Alberta and the US. I, I, I just think that Alberta should probably just go it alone. They may actually have a partner in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan may consider because a poll came out recently that said that actually the per capita desire to become separate from Canada is higher in Saskatchewan than it actually is in Alberta. And it's higher than even in Quebec. And Quebec is the only province that's ever had a referendum about separating from the rest. So, yeah, I've gone on and on. It's a difficult question, but ultimately, in my view, I don't think that Ontario and everybody else is ever going to join the US right now. But I think Alberta's probably, if the Liberals get in, Alberta will probably start looking at taking serious steps towards separation and becoming an independent country. Now, I'm all for Greenland joining the United States. I think that's smart.
Would the Liberals allow Alberta to do this?
They don't have a choice. They don't have a choice. So in 1995, Quebec had a referendum, and the Supreme Court spent the next 3 years figuring out how to allow a province to secede from Confederation here in Canada. So the mechanisms are already in place in order to make this really easy. If Quebec decided, hey, one day we want to revisit separation again, well, thanks to their buddies on the Supreme Court of Canada, they've set the conditions to make it very easy for Quebec to separate. Well, guess what? Alberta actually wants to now separate. So all they need to do is actually have a referendum. And if they meet all the thresholds of their referendum, I believe it's called the Clarity Act, now lets them take steps to secede from the rest of Canada. It's not that difficult. And I spoke into one of the lawyers who's looking at it.
How do you think this election is going to go?
I personally think that the conservatives in Canada don't usually answer polls. So all these polls that are published in the legacy media, they're all I don't believe them at all. Even though I just spoke about a poll. Um, I think that the conservatives that get calls on the phone from pollsters don't answer them. I think Mark Carney can't fill up any spaces to do a rally, but yet you got Pierre Poilievre who's filling up airplane hangars with 15,000 people. I think the media lies constantly in favor of the liberals, but I do think that it's going to be a blowout. I think that the Conservative Party is going to form the government. It's going to decimate the NDP, and I think it's going to be very harmful to the liberals. That's how I hope it's going to go. That's my best guess, but there's no honest way to gauge what's really going on. Maybe I could do some AI stuff to scrape the internet, scrape Twitter to see what the sentiment is. But other than that, your guess is as good as mine. Um, my best educated guess is that the conservatives are going to win.
You know,
That's my best guess.
when you look at that, and you mentioned, you said earlier too, the disconnect between the boomers and Gen Z,
Mhm.
right? Or the younger
I think
people.
so. I can't remember. There's so many new
I
generations. My
can't
dad
either.
is a boomer. Yeah, I think it's born after 46, 46 to some other age. I can't remember what the ages are. Um,
But the people, what are you saying?
but
People in their 20s, their early 20s?
yeah, so I can look it up.
No, it's okay. It's all right. I think it's Gen Z. I get it confused too, but because
Yeah.
we're millennials, you and I think, right? I should
Yeah,
know.
so it's 46 to uh 1964 are the boomers.
Okay,
And
so
so yeah,
why do you think there's a huge disconnect there?
because there's this it seems like this the boomers are there's a lot of anger in my country towards the boomers because the amount of wealth that they were able to accumulate and now are voting for a government that is actively creating policies that is going to make it impossible for the wealth of the boomers to be transferred to their children. I mean, we have crazy taxes in this country. Like we're some of the highest tax people in the entire world. And there's every time money or an asset or an object exchanges hands, Canadians are taxed on it. So inheritance tax. You're taxed on the inheritance you get from your family. I sell a house, I have to pay land transfer tax. I buy a house in the GTA, I also have to pay land transfer tax. So the person selling it and the person buying it both have to pay land transfer tax on the same piece of property, right? The so I think the frustration is that the boomers keep voting for liberals because they don't recognize that the liberals are no longer liberals. They're this Marxist whatever abomination. They're nothing like liberals. I mean, even Jean Chrétien doesn't recognize the Liberal Party anymore and what they used to be, or Paul Martin. That generation of liberals don't even recognize what Justin Trudeau's turned the party into. So, we have this anger towards boomers. My father's alive, he's a boomer. I don't have any animosity, but I'd be a little upset at him if he said to me, "Hey, I'm voting liberal." I'd be pretty angry about that because I'd be saying to him, "You're literally voting for the policies that are going to take all of your wealth and give it to the government. Whereas people that are 30 and under right now are saying they have no hope in hell of ever buying a home. It used to be pay off your house in 25 years. In Canada right now, in the GTA or Vancouver, parts of BC, it's 25 years to save up for the down payment to buy a house. Forget about buying a house. We have 30 and 40-year-olds living in their parents' houses now because they know they can't afford to buy a house in this country. And so when you've got that dynamic, and now you're saying, okay, wait a minute. If you die and I'm living in your house at 45, 50 years old, the government is now going to tax me on inheriting your house, the house that I've been in all my life. I now have to pay taxes to keep this place. This is the reality of it, and that's why people are angry with the boomers because they're going to support a government that is taxing this inheritance and many other issues, many other issues. So the younger generation doesn't feel really good about the fact that the liberals are going to get possibly could get voted back in. That's one of the issues.
Yeah, the boomers in this country, I, where I disagree with them. That's why I was curious what your thoughts were.
Mhm.
They think that the system is salvageable and everything is just going to work out. And these are the people that think when Trump came in, oh, he's just going to fix everything and we're fine.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I disagree. And I don't
Mhm.
blame younger people. And I make it a point to talk to them at the gym or
Yeah.
when I'm out somewhere or whatever. And I get why they're dropping out of college. I get why they hate school.
Yeah.
It does
Yes.
nothing for them. How can you have how
It,
can you have a boomer? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but how can
yeah.
you have a
No.
boomer be a public school teacher and try to teach a 17-year-old kid about anything? They can't keep up with these kids
No.
or
No, they
challenge them
can't.
mentally.
Hmm.
Not that there aren't some good ones. I'm sure. I mean there are, but
Yeah.
generally,
Yeah. And I certainly agree with that. We exported manufacturing out of North America, so um, there's not a lot of youth that are rushing into the manufacturing industry, and that's been going on for a long time. Everybody went rushing to the tech sector, into software. I used to teach software at a college before I got fired because of COVID mandates. And I'd have three, four sections of students, and I think all the colleges here in Ontario that are graduating software developers every April and every January. You got hundreds, if not thousands of kids all trying to graduate as software developers. How many auto mechanics are graduating? How many carpenters are graduating? Electricians and plumbers. We we can't even fill the schools because there are a few schools, but there's not enough schools training all that stuff. The government pushed everybody into IT. It didn't work. Now you can't get it. You won't get a plumber to show up at your house without paying them $200 just for arriving, without even looking at the work. And half the time they'll look at your work and say, "Well, I'm too busy making real money to deal with your toilet or your sink. Go on YouTube and figure it out yourself, buddy." So yeah, I think the education dynamic in this country has changed. It's shifted badly. And of course, if you go to post-secondary institutions in this country, you had better be woke because you're not keeping your job as a professor if you don't fall into the woke ideology. If you're not pushing that agenda, then you're not useful to the college. I did an interview. I was going to a different faculty, and it was to teach math. Like the class was math that I would have been teaching. And in my interview, they focused really heavily on DEI information. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I'm willing to bet that 95% of the students in that class, because it was a cabinet making program and I was teaching math for cabinet making, I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of the students in there are men. Okay. But most of the questions in the interview were about DEI. And I'm like, you couldn't, this is math. I'm teaching math. I didn't get the job, and the feedback was that I wasn't properly aligned with all the DEI. I'm like, but these people are paying me to teach them math for cabinet making, not to teach them about, diversity.
Tom, you didn't apologize for being white enough times in the interview.
I
If
know.
you would have apologized
Yes.
profusely
Yes.
that I'm
Yeah.
sorry for being white, you
Yeah.
probably would have got it.
There's a good chance of that. Yes.
People are just
Yeah.
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an attack on white people is what DEI is, and you should
Oh, yeah.
apologize over and over and over again. And yet people are so stupid that they still can't recognize what that is.
Look at what two-tier cure did in the UK 2 weeks ago. They just passed through legislation that basically said if you're a visible minority or a landed immigrant into the UK, you break the law, and upon sentencing, your sentencing criteria will be lesser, easier than if you were a Caucasian person from the UK. So they now have a two-tiered conviction system or sentencing guidelines based on race. Well, I'm sorry, nobody's skin ever raped and killed a little kid. Nobody's skin did that, but their culture and their behavior certainly did. So I don't understand why in the hell we're giving people preferential treatment because of the skin color.
Could,
It's absurd.
would you even go to Europe right now? I mean, do you think they A would let you
Poland.
in? Oh,
Yeah, I've been to Poland twice in the last 2 years and I absolutely love it there. Love it.
but London, I mean, they would
No, I wouldn't go to London.
because of your profile on X and
Yeah, I'd be afraid to get arrested. I'd be really afraid to get apprehended immediately upon. I'd be lucky if I even got on the plane if they allowed it.
yeah,
No, I will. I have no desire to ever go to London or Ireland or any of the countries because of the way their governments are treating their citizens.
yeah,
Absolutely not. I'd love to go through the States though. I would love to do a book tour through the States. Um, but the reason you and I are even talking today on this podcast is because I made that post about, there's very, very few podcasters in the United States that are talking to Canadians. This is the second time with you. Um, I I can't think of many American shows. I think I was on Steve Rogers about 2.5 years ago. Did a show with him, and I was on with Robert Kennedy right after the Convoy. But he's since then become pretty busy. Um, and I see a lot of Americans talking about Canada, and this was the post. A lot of Americans are talking about Canada, but I noticed they don't actually have a lot of Canadians on the show to talk to Canadians, and which is, yourself excluded from that, and maybe a couple of others. But I think the greatest threat to your national security in your country, and I've been saying this for a couple of years now, is Canada. Is the federal government of Canada is the greatest threat to national security of the United States. It's not your southern border. It's not just your southern border. It's the Marxist socialist government on your northern border. And this is where, in my view, I don't think the jokes about Trudeau and the tariffs and all that stuff, I don't think it started out where it was just to focus on, trolling Justin Trudeau. I don't think it was just about the fentanyl in the illegals getting into the United States from Canada, because truthfully, I took Michael Yon. He's a big American investigative combat journalist, war correspondent. He came and stayed at my house here. I took him to an American a crossing between Fort Erie and Buffalo. We stood at the bridge, a rail bridge where people come in both directions. So it's not just America or Canada letting immigrants, illegals into the US. It's the US that doesn't stop them either. And we had Roxham Road. We were getting flooded during Obama days with immigrants coming from America into Canada. So that one's a little bit of I don't believe in that one at all. But yeah, the fentanyl, we know the fentanyl's coming from Vancouver and getting into the US from Chinese ports and Chinese ships and Chinese, let's say, networks coming into Canada and flooding into the US. So yeah, that's a big problem. But ultimately, my point being, rather again long-winded, I apologize. Um, Everything that I think Trump was doing in the early days of this second presidency was because of the relationship with China and the Canadian government. I think he's fully been briefed probably on the Chinese activity here in Canada. And I think he's done stuff that things that are not overly obvious to the public, both Canada and the US, to counteract some of the influence of China in Canada. He knows he's got a threat. He knows he has a major threat in Canada, and it's the Chinese government. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And if it was, I would say that they all should resign and start looking for new careers if they haven't figured out the threat to America is actually on Canadian soil, and it comes from the Chinese Communist Party. We
yes,
we have a we have a just to prove the point, we have four Chinese police stations here in Canada. There's two of them in Toronto, one of them in Vancouver, and I think one in Montreal. We have a host of Chinese police officers right here in Toronto. One of them is a former Chinese, sorry, Toronto police officer. He's Chinese. He's now running as a member of the Federal Liberal Party of Canada. We have Chinese citizens that are members of our parliament. You know,
I would take it a step further, though, and in regards to China, and I'm talking about the United States here, we're the ones that have allowed all this. The United States government has allowed all this, in my view. We
yeah,
allowed them to get into the universities.
yes,
I see people are talking about, oh, China steals intellectual property. Well, yeah, we let them do it. Of course they're going to steal it. Who wouldn't do that if you could take advantage of it? We had politicians that were screwing Chinese spies.
yeah,
The
yep,
fentanyl, we did nothing in regards to the border. The private companies, the UPSs, the
uh-huh,
FedExes of the world. I never saw any of them on the Hill testifying what they were doing to combat the
nope,
packages that were coming in.
hmm yeah,
So it's and I'm sure the same applies to your government. They allowed all this.
yes,
We allowed the Chinese to come in and buy property all throughout the United States.
hmm yeah. We had a group of Chinese investors that came to Canadian Forces Base Trenton. It's our biggest Air Force base in the country. And at the end of the runway, a house came up for sale, and the Chinese investors tried to purchase the house at the end of the runway. The offering price was three times more than what the sellers were asking. It was the real estate agent that contacted the RCMP. And then finally, the government got interested and shut down the actual, acquisition of this house right at the end of one of our busiest runways. You know, I think our government is completely complicit with what China's doing. I mean, we here in Canada trained the Chinese military in winter warfare. We were doing this for a number of years. I have friends from my days in the military. I got a friend of mine, poor guy, I messaged him right away. He was the commanding officer of an engineer regiment, and he's doing the grip and grin photo op with the Chinese colonel, as they were here in Canada at at CFP Petawawa, which is a major combat operation base for us. And they were training the Chinese army in winter warfare. Like, in what world does that make any sense? That we would allow China to come and be trained by Canadian troops in winter warfare. I would expect Russia to do that, but not Canada. But, you know, it happens. We were training Chinese fighter pilots in London, Ontario. Yeah.
I know I've kind of went over time here with you, but I know you want to talk. Would love to hear about the new book you're writing, or
Yeah.
some of the projects, and
Yeah. So the one of the things I finally got hired by an amazing guy named Jonathan Bahai. And he owns a software company, and we're building a software platform called Toto, like the Wizard of Oz Toto. And it's really an activism platform. It's not social media, it's activism media. And we have a bunch of tools on there to help the public guide politics and to get involved politically. And it's a great tool. I've been working on this thing since last June. Um, I started off as a junior programmer on the team, but I'm now running the entire project, and I'm not doing any programming anymore. But this is something that I've been working on since last June. I love it. I believe in it, and I think this platform is going to be for great things. It's going to be able to put the hands or put the power truly back into the people to put pressure on their elected representatives. We have Americans on the team, we have Canadians on the team, and we're looking at both government systems and how they work, and we're implementing tools that accommodate everybody. So that's the thing I've been working on in my full-time job now. But recently, last week on April 7th, I published my second book, which is called The Upstream Effect. And it's really a book based on all my Substack articles because I write a lot since my first book, which was the People's Emergency Act, which is time at the Convoy. And I discovered that I really like to write. So I write a lot and I write articles on my Substack. And this is always, all my articles are always to give people something to think about, obviously, but I try to always offer some practical steps on how you can make that particular situation better. If the article resonates with you and you're experiencing in your life, these are the things that you can hopefully do to overcome them. So what I decided to do was write the Substack, and when I got to a certain amount, I would convert all of them into a single book and share that with people who are interested in purchasing the book. And it's called The Upstream Effect: How Politics Captured Culture and how we take it back. Because in days past, there was this saying that said that politics was downstream of culture. And the contention of my book is that, well, actually, culture has been now subverted because politicians have subverted or have placed themselves upstream of culture. So now we've got politicians who are very sorry, I might have pulled out my microphone.
No, I hear you. You're good.
I'm good. I'm good. You know, we don't have that dynamic anymore. The politicians are not sort of chasing culture and influencing culture after the fact. They're deliberately inserting themselves right at the beginning of it. And a great example of that is DEI. That's a political thing. That's all these NGOs and political backing to force DEI onto the public. And the public was never ready for that, never wanted it, never asked for it. So this is the why it's called the upstream effect, is because politicians have inserted themselves upstream of our culture. So I've got that book. I published that last week. But the third book that I'm writing, and I'm most excited about this book, to be perfectly honest. So I spent 25 years in the Army. I was trained to the level of a lieutenant colonel. I retired as a captain. I made the promotion list the year I retired for major. But I've taken all of the military processes that I learned over the years in both combat operations, domestic operations, and just normal planning. And I've converted that whole methodology into a planning book. It's a workbook. It's a guideline to help you, as somebody at home, develop your own emergency plan. And if you look, in the world of prepping, there's a lot of websites out there. There's a lot of YouTube channels for prepping and all that kind of stuff. But there's very, very little content, I feel, that focuses on how to plan. You have to go through a process. Like, we don't, in the military, we don't just decide to launch a battle and make it up as we go. The amount of planning that we go through is a process called the operational planning process. It's a NATO standard. So even, US soldiers would recognize the processes in this book. So would Canadians, British, French, anybody who belongs to NATO would recognize the process. But all I've done is civilianized it to help you, the lone civilian in your home with your family, follow this process to create the best possible plan in an emergency for your family. So, for example, I do follow a case study. It's a young couple with two kids. They're eating dinner, they watch the news, and the news comes on and says, in 3 days, there's going to be a flood in your area. What do you do? Right. And so it takes that sort of case study and it follows it all the way through. And the intent is, when you finish the workbook, and it is a workbook, there'll be pages you can print off or, photocopy. You follow the process. At the end, you're going to have your own plan for your own family. And, you know, you can't get too detailed to the point where you're overwhelmed. I'm saying you're going to do a planning cycle just in case there's a flood in your area. But if you live in the desert, you shouldn't be planning doing a big contingency plan for wildfires, right? So you got to apply some logic. You look at your own circumstance, your own situation, because a lot of people, I've taught this stuff to groups of people before too, and they say, "Hey, uh, can I just pay you? You'll write me a plan." And I'm like, "No, I'm not going to just write you a plan. I'm going to teach you how to go through the process and derive your own plan, and then go from there." And one of the important things about this is you go on the websites or the YouTube channels and they say, "Hey, you need this bug out bag and you need this piece of kit and you need to have a truck that does this." And people spend all this money on and they focus on kit and accumulating food and water and all that stuff. Well, until you've gone through and done the planning process, how do you know that you even need that piece of equipment? You haven't actually done a full-on analysis of it to see if, hey, do I need that? Do I need a pressure cooker if I'm dealing with you know, emergency X, Y, and Z? I don't think so. I don't know. But you got to go through and do the full-on analysis and make deductions that, hey, yeah, I do need that piece of equipment. You can do this on the fly. It's obvious. Hopefully I can get an inflatable boat if I'm facing a flood. Okay. But do I need a snowblower in a flood? No, I don't. Right? Let's go through the whole analysis, all the factors for this. And that's really what the book is about. And that one I'm really excited to do because I think I'm going to convert that into an interactive website as well. So you'll be able to follow the process online. And at the end, you'll have a print ready plan based on everything happening in your life. So that's what I'm looking at as side projects.
When is that coming out?
I've got the manuscript for the planning book, and the book title, the working title for my new book is going to be called The People's Emergency Plan. And it's a play on my first book, which was the People's Emergency Act, as a result of the Emergencies Act in Canada that Justin Trudeau invoked. So I think the manuscript is all the text is written. I'm just finalizing the worksheets, and then I'm going to be building the website around it. So I would think within the next 3 months or less.
Yeah, well, I could speak for living in Arizona in the desert. If something were to
Mhm.
happen here,
Mhm.
we're screwed.
Yeah, yeah,
Especially in the summer. This is why I'm going to leave here. And, because, Tom, I want to live in a place where there's water. It just sounds
yes.
appealing to me. Like,
Mhm. No, I totally agree. And I know southern parts of the US they've got severe challenges with water. Um,
this is a place, in my view, was never designed for this many millions of people to live here. And
mhm.
something will happen in Arizona, in
Yeah,
Phoenix. Might not be in my lifetime, but at some point,
yeah,
something is going to happen. And if the
mhm.
power goes out here in July, we're,
Yeah,
I don't know, 98% of this valley is dead. And you're not
yeah,
getting out of here. It's not like you're going to get in your car and jump on the highway and just leave easily.
yeah. And the first thing I do in the first whole, like the first part of the process is something called intelligence preparation of the environment. We don't look at where you live and the environment that you're in with a specific emergency in place. We just look at all the factors around you. What are the major highways around me? Am I located near the Grand Canyon? Because that's an obstacle. That's a major obstacle to have to overcome. Am I near bodies of water? Do I live in a floodplain? Doesn't matter what the emergency is. What matters is that you analyze the environment that you're in and you start off very, very general, and then you start to focus and get very, very specific about your specific situation that you live in. And that's why we go through and we follow a very logical process. I didn't invent the process. I took it from my experience with the army. I modified it so that civilians could use this process to plan their own emergencies. And you do the plan, you go through the cycle, and every couple months, every 6 months, 12 months, you review the plan. You initial that you've reviewed the plan or you've updated the plan. And then you put the plan back on the bookshelf in a binder. And that's really what it's meant to be. So that if something does happen, you pull that specific plan off the shelf and you say, this is what we're doing. We don't have to panic. We've already planned for it. Let's go. Right. And that's the big difference.
I had a friend who went through the hurricanes in Western North Carolina, and he had
Mm,
10 days without power. And he said to me, he's like, you go through. He goes, that was a huge test for the idea of prepping. And
yeah.
he said, do's and don'ts. I'm going to go back and correct things. He goes, well, one of the most important aspects of it is access to clean water. And he said
Yes.
a generator was not. You learn to live
Mhm.
without it because if you have a generator, and I was talking to a woman here in Phoenix that I ran into the other day, and I'm guessing she's probably in her 60s, and she said, "Well, I have a generator because she's trying to get her kids out of California." And I
Yeah.
said, "I think this is a Arizona is a horrible place to be." And she's like,
Mhm.
"Well, I have a generator." I'm like, "Okay." So, and I didn't get in an argument with her, but I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay, let's just imagine July, the power goes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Where are you going to go fill that? Where are you going to fill the generator up at?" And
Yeah.
let's say you timed it right.
Mhm.
uh, People are going to come knocking on your door. They're not going to come knocking. They're going to
Yeah.
come take.
Taking. Yes. So there's a chapter I wrote about the ethics, the ethics of emergencies. So I spend a lot of time talking about that because people they actually have to do a personal assessment of their own level of violence that they're willing to live with. You don't think about these things when your heart is racing at 175 beats per minute and come up with a plan. You have to consider all of these possible things long before you're in that situation. If we put it into a military context, we don't go into battle without knowing exactly what we want to do and to achieve, and recognizing that the enemy gets a vote. But we've already spent time analyzing what all the options are available to the enemy. So we actually have a decision support template, which I put in the book. It's like if the enemy does this, this is what my reaction is. If the enemy does that, then I'm going to do this instead. Right? We think about these things when we're not under fear and under pressure. And so this is why this process is so important because really when you're terrified, you can't think. You lose cognitive ability very, very rapidly. Like most people don't understand that within the first 10 seconds of a fear-induced heart rate, they're starting to lose the fine motor control. After about 10 seconds, it's starting to really be difficult to use fine motor control. After another 30 seconds to a minute, your gross motor control is now impaired. And if anyone doesn't know what that means, think back to a time where there was an emergency and you had to dial 111 or 911 and try to think of how hard it was to dial 911 when you were terrified because you were dealing with a life or death emergency. That's not the time to be making a plan to save your family from a natural disaster. You need to be able to have already done the full on analysis, created the plan. One of the chapters I do is I talk about kit, and it's a simple thing. On one side of the column, you make a spreadsheet or a matrix. You write all the equipment that you own. Across the top, you do all the natural disasters that could possibly happen, including civil unrest. And you do a matrix. And you say, you know what? Flood, boat, I need it. So that when you're looking for what kit do I need to get during an emergency, I just have to focus on that one column and start throwing that stuff into my boat or into my truck or whatever it is if I decide that I have to leave. But before you even decide if you have to leave, you have to do the analysis or what are my three courses of action? Do I stay? Do I go? My third option is do I stay with a view to possibly having to leave? And then you have to figure out like what are all the triggers that will lead me to deciding, okay, this event happened, that's a trigger. This is the decision that's going to result from that incident happening. So in my flood example, if I say, hey, the river has risen 75% of what it would rise in a 100-year storm, To me, that's a trigger. What's my decision? I'm going to leave now. I'm getting my family out of here now, right? Your triggers and your decisions might be a lot less. You might say, if that river rises 25% of a 100-year storm, that's enough for me. I'm leaving because I know that the highway is going to be completely jam-packed and I won't be able to get out. So you go and you do the whole analysis. You derive what your action is. You don't just do a rectal plan and say, this is what we're doing. I know we're all terrified and, but this is how you go about doing the process. So that's what the book is about. It's a process that I want people to follow so that they do this when they're not terrified.
Where can people find you, Tom?
Well, mostly on the social media side, I hang out on Twitter or on X. I have to admit, I detest Facebook. I don't understand Instagram because I have nothing that I want to post. But usually, if they want to get a hold of me, it's X and Substack. And my Substack is just Tom Marazzo. My Twitter is just Tom Marazzo. I keep it nice and original. Nothing fancy.
And your recent book?
All my books are the current two that I have are on Amazon, and all of them will be on Amazon. And I know a lot of people hate Amazon, but I post it there because it's cheapest to get it into the hands of the readers.
Is it better for
So
them to order? Is there any other place they can order from that would benefit you more than going through
no,
Amazon?
no, not really. Amazon, you know, I don't sell enough books to make it worth my while to try to build another website and go it alone because then I'd have to spend tens of thousands on inventory and do that. But I don't sell enough books to do that. So it's best for everybody else. And if I was selling millions of copies, sure, then maybe I would consider going to a different system. But here's the secret. People don't buy books anymore. So everything is either a podcast or a Substack or an audiobook. Um, so Amazon, I think, is the right balance. It gets it to your door the fastest.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be able to replicate that.
I was going to an independent bookstore here in Phoenix. It was cool. It's a cool little store, right? They have a little coffee
Yeah.
bar or whatever. And so I would go, I'm like, well, I'll do it. It's out of my way, but I don't care.
Mhm.
Helping the local community, whatever. Even though it's not like I'm buying hundreds of books.
Mhm.
And long story short, I was following their handle on Instagram. Changing Hands is the name of it. And this
Mhm.
is before COVID. I mean, BLM, ripping on
Yeah.
Trump supporters.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to order from Amazon because they'll bring it right to my door. Why am I going to drive 25 minutes to you to help you?
Yeah. 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 I was in Napa Valley last year at this time. Um, and I brought a couple books, took it to a bookstore, dropped it off, tried to talk to the manager. She was gone for the day when I arrived. Fine. They looked at the book and they said, "Yeah, your book would not be suitable for our clientele." My book about the convoy. So unfortunately, never went anywhere.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I feel like they're
No.
all universally. Well, there's one here in Scottsdale. They've hosted Jack Carr a couple of times
Mhm.
as he's come through,
Right.
which I was surprised by because I just assume all these independent bookstores are very left leaning. But
Mhm. Well, I even here the main bookstore we have chapters in Indigo here. They won't take our books. Like they wouldn't cover the first book to come out about the Freedom Convoy. They refused to sell it.
mm.
So I didn't even try because I knew better. Waste of time.
Tom, thanks for doing this. Look forward to
Yeah, no
continuing to follow
problem.
your work. Congratulations on the recent launch of the book, and
Yeah,
look forward to more conversations ahead.
sure. Anytime. Thank you.
Mic drop.